Hello, I'm Peter Story, and today I'll be summarizing our paper, From Intent to Action, Nudging Users Towards Secure Mobile Payments. It's well known that there's a gap between the advice of privacy and security experts and then what most people actually do. In our study, we focused on the low adoption of secure mobile payments in the US, despite the prevalence of credit and debit card fraud. Mobile payment systems like Apple Pay employ stronger security protections than physical cards, yet they have relatively low adoption here. So we investigated 2 interventions with the potential to increase adoption. We chose to study nudging interventions. Nudges are designed to help people act as they say they want to, by helping people to overcome their own cognitive and behavioral biases. Our first nudge was based on protection motivation theory, and our second nudge was based on implementation intentions. Protection motivation theory suggests that people's motivation to act is based on their perceptions of threat susceptibility, threat severity, response efficacy, and self-efficacy. We address these 4 points with different pieces of relevant information. A person's perception of threat susceptibility is how likely they think they are to be personally affected by a threat. And we address this by describing recent cases of card information theft, like the Target hack, the Home Depot hack, and the recent Saks Fifth Avenue hack. Threat severity is a measure of how serious a person thinks it would be if they were in fact affected by the threat. And we address threat severity by describing the consequences of card fraud for individuals. A person's perception of response efficacy is their belief that the response they can take will be an effective protection. In this case, whether using mobile payments will actually protect them from the threat of card fraud. And we addressed threat or response efficacy by describing the security protections that are offered by mobile payments. And finally, self-efficacy is your belief that you'll be able to perform the response, that is, to use mobile payments. We address self-efficacy by describing the availability of mobile payments, and we included text and video instructions for using them. Our second nudge was based on implementation intentions. An implementation intention is a concrete, contextually activated plan to achieve a goal. In this case, the goal being to stay safe from card fraud. The literature suggests that implementation intentions are especially well suited to helping people remember to take an action, such as remembering to make a secure mobile payment instead of paying with their usual physical card. In our study, we presented participants with a plan template to help them form their own implementation intention. We first reassured participants that it was optional to fill out the plan. We next encouraged participants to list up to 3 stores or restaurants where they thought they were likely to have the opportunity to make a mobile payment in the coming week. Then participants completed a mental rehearsal activity where they pictured themselves making mobile payments at each location they listed. And finally, we gave participants the opportunity to commit to their plan. We studied these nudges with a mixed methods design. We first conducted a series of longitudinal interviews with 20 participants, and these interviews helped us identify common misconceptions and refine the design of our nudges. We next conducted a longitudinal between subjects field experiment, this time with 411 participants. Also, note that we finished collecting data in late 2019, so that's before there was widespread awareness of the coronavirus in the US. For interviews, we recruited people who had recently made a card-based payment and who had not recently used mobile payments, but who had phones compatible with either Apple Pay, Google Pay, or Samsung Pay. In our first semi-structured interview, we asked participants about their prior experiences with card fraud, and then we exposed all participants to both the protection motivation theory and implementation intentions-based nudges. A week after completing the interview, we sent participants a survey, and we asked them whether they'd set up a mobile payment system on their phone and whether they'd used it to make a purchase. If they had set up a mobile payment system, we then invited them to a follow-up interview. And in this interview, we asked about their experiences using mobile payments or their reasons for not using them. And finally, 4 weeks after completing the first follow-up survey, we sent a second follow-up survey to anyone who had set up a mobile payment on their phone, and we asked whether they'd recently made a mobile payment. So none of the people we recruited for our interview had used mobile payments in stores in the past month. But we found that nearly all had heard of either Apple Pay, Google Pay, or Samsung Pay before our study. They reported seeing mobile payments in ads, on their phones, as payment options, knowing friends or family who used the systems, or having personally used the systems for digital purchases. So it seems unlikely that the low adoption of mobile payments in the US is solely due to lack of awareness. Participants described several positive aspects of mobile payments, such as them being easy to use, removing the need for using cards and for their wallet, while mobile payments being a good backup option, and mobile payments being fun to use. Now, our most enthusiastic participant said they hadn't voluntarily used their card since starting to use Apple Pay, and that it was their new default payment method. However, as we introduced mobile payments to participants and they tried to use them, a number of obstacles also arose. 2 participants were confused by the setup process for Apple Pay, where it gives you the option to scan your card to automatically fill in the details. Other challenges included people's cards not being supported, having to interact with one's bank to approve the addition of the card to Apple Pay. Sometimes this means you have to call the bank. Not having opportunities to use mobile payments not being accepted in some stores, not remembering to use mobile payments, and then simply having difficulty using them. So I'll give more detail about usability challenges on the next slide. 4 of our participants who set up Apple Pay described accidentally activating it on their phones, and this accidental activation alarmed at least one of our participants. They wondered where their card information was being sent when activated. The credit thing keeps popping up whenever I angle my phone a certain direction. I wonder where it's sending my credit info each time. So it's possible to open Apple Pay by either double-clicking the home button when the phone's locked, or by bringing the phone in proximity to an NFC reader, even if that near-field communication reader isn't a payment terminal. So we address this confusion to some extent by describing that double-clicking to activate functionality in the Apple Pay usage instructions in both our subsequent interviews and in our experiment. Now, one of these same participants encountered another usability challenge, and that's the failure of Apple Pay to activate. At one location, this participant reported having to scan their phone twice before it worked, and at another location, they were frustrated because they weren't able to use Apple Pay, and they concluded that it must not have been supported because it didn't activate. What happens when it doesn't work is that nothing happens. It just sits there, and it doesn't even apologize. It doesn't say anything on it. Oops, sorry, try again. Nothing like that. So due to the lack of a signal from the payment terminal, when the terminal doesn't support mobile payments, there might not actually be a technical solution to this failure mode. We gave all participants the opportunity to form an implementation intention plan to use mobile payments, and 16 did describe at least one location where they might use mobile payments in the week ahead. So forming plans seemed to help 4 participants identify places that it could be difficult to make mobile payments. For example, it might be difficult to make a mobile payment at a restaurant if they collect your card, bring it to the back room, and swipe it themselves. Or it could be difficult to use mobile payments at gas stations because here in the US, many have been slow to upgrade from magstripe readers. A number of different misconceptions came up in our interviews. We had participants wonder whether mobile payments would interfere with their card rewards, whether we were being paid by Apple Pay or by Apple to promote Apple Pay. We had participants wonder if mobile payments cost something to use. We also had participants conflate Apple Pay with iPad-based point-of-sale terminals, like the Square payment system, not realizing that those are from a different company. And we had a participant wonder whether mobile payments would completely eliminate receipts. So we addressed some of these misconceptions in our FAQ that we included in our experiment. We addressed questions like, is Apple Pay free? Will I still earn card rewards? Can I add multiple cards? How can I be sure Apple Pay is safe? And we refuted the notion that we're being paid by Apple to promote Apple Pay. So about a third of the participants in the interview section of our study made a mobile payment at least once, and none of these people had used mobile payments before, in physical locations, that is. So this suggests that our nudges did influence participants' behavior, but we needed a controlled experiment to be able to reliably measure whether there was an effect and its size. So that's what we did next. We ran our experiment on the prolific crowdsourcing platform. We chose to focus on Apple Pay. We recruited people who'd recently made a card-based payment and who had not recently used Apple Pay, but who had phones compatible with Apple Pay. We had 3 treatment conditions: a group that saw only the protection motivation theory-based nudge, a group which saw that and the implementation intentions-based nudge, and a control group that saw neither nudge. So we didn't test implementation intentions alone, because the literature suggests that implementation intentions will not be effective if people are not motivated. And the idea is that the protection motivation theory nudge should provide that motivation. Now, after a week, we followed up, and we asked participants in another survey whether they'd actually used Apple Pay since the previous survey. So we found that our treatments did make participants more likely to use Apple Pay. We found a large difference between our PMT plus implementation intention treatment and the control group, and then a medium difference between the PMT-only treatment and the control group, and both these differences were statistically significant. The difference between the PMT-only and the PMT plus implementation intentions treatment was not statistically significant. So our treatments also made participants more likely to agree that Apple Pay would protect them from card fraud. As shown in the graph here, in the control group, we had only 37% agree that Apple Pay would protect them, whereas in both treatment groups, over 84% agreed. So participants' initial skepticism of Apple Pay's security is actually consistent with prior work and the findings from our interviews. So in our interview, some participants were concerned that Apple, Google, or their phones might be hacked. And even though such hacks are theoretically possible, it's our position that they require substantially more resources from attackers, making them less realistic and less a threat to end users. We also found that those in our treatment groups expressed greater intentions to use Apple Pay in the week ahead. Now those in our implementation intention treatment expressed even greater intentions than those in the PMT-only group. However, we observed that in many cases, intention to use Apple Pay didn't translate into actual use of Apple Pay. So more than half of those who expressed a strong intention to use Apple Pay did so, but those with weaker intentions were much less likely to use Apple Pay. And this shows the importance of asking participants about both their intentions and their actual behavior. We found that participants who set up Apple Pay during our study, they mostly did so between the survey with our intervention and the follow-up survey a week later. Maybe people wanted more time to think before setting up Apple Pay. And this shows the importance of using a longitudinal design to measure people's behavior in the real world. It's also interesting that more than a third of participants had already set up Apple Pay but hadn't used it recently. These participants might benefit the most from nudging interventions, since for them there's one less thing getting in the way of them using them. In conclusion, we designed nudges to correct people's misconceptions about mobile payments and help them make plans to use them. And both our treatments increased real-world adoption of Apple Pay, shrinking the gap between experts' advice and users' behavior. Nudges like ours may help increase adoption of other tools and other best practices, so we hope that our work will inspire future exploration of this design space. Thanks so much for watching. Please get in touch if you have any questions or thoughts. Thank you for your time.